Here's Lavrov. He was asked a question about the so-called coalition of the willing on the European side and what they want to accomplish.
They didn't specify in their name what they are willing for. Apparently, they are willing for a sense of their own superiority, the ability to decide things as they please without listening, ignoring the opinions of others. In modern Europe, this is linked to the trend of reviving Nazi views, habits, and mannerisms. But this is not the language to use with Russia. If this coalition of the willing is led by even remotely sane leaders, then I think they should realize this quickly. Otherwise, they will step onto the path of war without any reservations.
So Lavrov is anything if not very diplomatic and very measured. You never hear him ranting and raving and screaming, but his words there are pretty stark. That, listen, I don't know what you guys think your coalition is willing to do, but unless you want to move down a path that could lead to war, you might want to reconsider that. I think that's a warning that we should probably pay attention to.
Absolutely. I mean, he's like a Jedi warrior, isn't he? He's just speaks common sense.
Don't you love how measured he is?
Really measured. He's always calm. Yeah. You know, I can't imagine him losing his temper. I can imagine him raising his voice to emphasize something. But could I imagine him shouting in anger at somebody? No, I could just imagine him really being emphatic. But yeah, he's great. It's great, and he's the work of the devil, according to the British state. There's no need for dissent.
Yeah, over the weekend he was on CBS show, I think Face the Nation, whatever. Margaret Brennan was interviewing Lavrov, and she had asked him a question regarding, the upcoming talks. She goes, are they actually going to happen? And Lavrov just said, well, don't you believe your own president?
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, the coalition of the willing, or what, I don't know, what the coalition of the disunited. They're united on one thing. They're absolutely uniquely united on their dislike and hatred of Russia and all things Russian. But that's about it. There's no money there's no people to go and do any killing. There's no weapons to go and do any killing. There's no strategy to do any killing. But that said, I was just mentioning off air just before we came on. I got a call last week when I was abroad in Greece from a colonel, British colonel, now based in Germany, and he is going to be part of a small, and when I asked what does small mean, I mean, is that 100, is that 20 guys, is that 100 guys, is that 500 guys, what does small mean? And he said, well, small, and that's what I was told. A small team to go into Ukraine, and he was handpicking a team to go in as peacekeepers. And I said, when are you likely to go in? And he said, when there's peace. I know. He seemed to feel that. He said it'd be quite an easy job. But it's just, I mean, I personally don't ever believe that he's going to be going there.
Well, again, I just can't understand why anybody would even give a what's called prepare to deploy order in the U.S. in the U.S. military parlance. Why would you get a prepare to deploy order when the other side is categorically against any NATO member state, regardless of what flag they fly under, et cetera, to be part of any peacekeeping contingent? Russia is apparently willing to consider peacekeepers to enforce or at least monitor any kind of an end of negotiation, an end of term, war negotiations that come out. But they said it won't be them and they wouldn't agree to it. And if some come in without being agreed to by the Russian side, they will simply be considered as enemy combatants and they will be treated as such and attacked. So I just can't understand, why does either France or Britain think that we're going to get actually prepared to do something that either won't be accepted or could lead to war? Explain that to me. Okay,
because very, very clearly we have a different perception. When I say we, I don't talk about myself in that. The royal we, the Brits, we have a different perception of what that means. So, for example, Ben Wallace has said this previously when he was the defence minister. Ukraine is a sovereign, and Starmer said this. Ukraine is a independent sovereign nation. It has the choice on who it deploys on its border. So if he wants to put American weapons there, Brazilian weapons, British weapons, whatever on its border, it can. It's sovereign. It can.
I agree with that. That is a true statement. I don't dispute that.
Absolutely. So, but it's a straw man because nobody could disagree with that. But then you have to say, okay, compromise isn't a dirty word. So, okay, let's get the Russians putting their missiles and Russian crack troops on the border of Mexico. The Americans would have a fit. They'd have a heart attack. There'd be World War III in minutes. And the Russians wouldn't be that
even
stupid.
add, though, even before you get too much further down the road there, in the same logic of that Ukraine is an independent country and they can put whoever they want on their border, Russia is also an independent country and they can do whatever they want on their side of the border, i.e. they can't attack them. So it's not one side or the other. You got to take both of them into consideration.
No, well, that's why I said compromise isn't a dirty word. So when I say, Danny, I'm going to do you're my neighbor, I'm going to do all of this stuff on my fence that's going to really aggravate you, but it's on my fence and there's nothing you can do. And you say, well, if you do that, it's going to really aggravate myself and my family, and we're going to feel threatened by your behavior. Well, compromise, me saying, well, okay, maybe I won't do this and maybe I won't do that, isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maturity. But we don't have that mentality. I mean, it's almost comical that when Biden was questioned about putting troops, American troops on the border of Russia, and it being a red line for Russia, he said, we don't recognize your red line. And there's your problem. There's your problem. You know, I'm going to do all this stuff to you, Danny, on your doorstep, and it's going to really antagonize you and your family. And I said, well, I don't care about Danny and his family. There's the problem. And that's where we are.
And that's where also the Russians recognize. In that same interview, he was asked, Lavrov was, what do you think about the European leaders and what is the countermeasures that the Russian side could take?
We see how the same Macron, Starmer, and now even Friedrich Merz, on the eve of assuming the chancellorship, are shouting militant, hostile slogans, threatening the Russian Federation. I don't think this reflects the position of the French or German people. Apparently, these leaders already understand that if they follow the path of decisions, views and aspirations voiced during elections, they won't be able to build their careers. They want to cling to power through such shocking hostility. I will repeat once again, we have strong nerves. President Putin has said many times that we are ready to discuss any issues, but of course, we are polite people and expect basic decency from those who will inevitably turn to us.
So again, very measured terms here, saying all this nonsense and noise that we keep getting from everybody else on the European side, we have nerve steels and you will inevitably turn to us, I think, because he sees the dynamic of power, and that conversation could be a little different. And in fact, one of the things that the Western side has been complaining about was that Russia attacked this. They launched a missile strike into Kiev a couple of days ago. They launch missiles nearly every night, and they're saying, "See, they are not committed to peace. They're not wanting to have this negotiated settlement. They don't want a ceasefire because they're the impediment to peace." And the question is, when did Russia ever say they were going to stop fighting? They have never said that. No. And even this alleged energy deal, don't hit the energy infrastructure, that's already expired, which I don't know that anybody ever fully operated it. But now Russia has said, we'll stop fighting when we come to an agreement and not. But then the West wants to change that around and say, well, you're fighting, so that means you don't want peace, because the West side is saying with Zelensky, we'll have an unconditional ceasefire for 30 days. And Russia says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And instead of saying, why would they do that? They just want to say, see, that's how bad Russia is. And Russia's going, yeah, look, y'all can say that all day long, but the reality on the ground continues to go to the West. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the Brits and the Germans and the French, they're on a narrative. They're not on a strategy. There's no real overall strategic thinking. They're just
they're just following a political narrative that's against the Russians. But here's the problem. This is what I think. This is how I think it will pan out and where it will go personally. I don't have a crystal ball, I'm afraid. But we will, I say we, the Brits, we'll be like in a barroom brawl. And, you two, Danny and Gary are holding me back. And I'm there like ready to, listen, hold me back, guys, because I'm ready to go in. And you go, no, Ian, don't do it. No, don't do it. No, I'm ready to go in. No, don't hold me back. I think that's what Keir Starmer, Macron, and what the Germans are doing, because it's easy to go, come on, I'm ready for you. Just come on, rush me. I'm coming. And everyone hold me back because I'm so hard and so tough. Because I don't have to fight anyone, because the Russians, as I said, are quite polite and they're ready to openly discuss and try and find resolution here. So we're just going to keep talking tough until the Trump thing happens. And I believe that will happen at some point. I don't believe the Americans will walk away. The Americans need to make this work because they started it. So they have to.
Yeah, you don't think Trump would walk away?
No, I know. I think he would very much walk away, but I don't think he will. Do I think he's got? Do I think he's got the ability to walk away? Absolutely. But I think that they will stay and try and make this work.
Well, they'll only stay as long as they have somebody on the European side or the Ukraine.
I'm being paid a lot of money to say that, by the way. Someone will say that.
Not being paid enough, I think.
No, not enough. No.
Because look, I think because Trump is coming up on our domestic side here. He's coming up on a decision point to where he has said that with both himself, the vice president, secretary of state, that look, y'all either come up with a deal that we can live with, or we're going to walk. If he doesn't walk, and apparently, and it continued, if the European side continues to say we're not going to play that way, and then Trump doesn't walk, and he does keep supporting, now then he's been defeated politically, and he's seasoned weak. And Trump doesn't like to be seen as weak.
No,
so I think that there's a good chance that he could roll. What do you think, Gary?
Oh, I think very much so. Especially, I thought it was interesting yesterday with the interview that you did with the Russian ambassador Dmitry Peskov, that he portrayed Zelensky as a cog in the machine. He's just an actor. He does not want peace. He's not willing to capitulate in any way, which is why he keeps Zelensky keeps restanding his ground. And what he said about Crimea this week, that there was no way they were going to be surrendering that land. So the ambassador explained that, listen, we see him for what he is, Zelensky. We see him for what he is. That, he basically, without saying that he was illegitimate, he basically said he's an illegitimate actor, and that's all he's doing is acting. He's playing a role. He has no interest in seeking peace, finding peace, and that's what he's there. Zelensky is only there to prolong the war. That's how they see it, and that's why he also said, the ambassador said, that's why we're on the battlefield. That's what we're doing. We've got a clown that's trying to make some negotiations. We don't believe it. We see it for what it is. We will fight until we have to stop fighting, but it doesn't look like it's anytime soon.
No.
Yeah, I think
no, I agree. I mean, I agree. I agree. But I do think, just reiterate what I said, do I think Trump would say, sorry, I've had enough, we're off? Absolutely. He's got the ability to do that and would and could do that. But I still think he will try and be seen to be the peacemaker. I believe that.
Oh yeah, he definitely wants to be. I don't see any doubt about that. But I think that he'll come to a point to where
Zelensky's a nobody.
If he can't make peace, then he may say, "I'm going to have to just walk away so that I don't be part of the loss that would come from that." You mentioned that some people say, "Oh well, you guys are just talking Russian talking points there." Okay, so you just saw Lavrov talk about how a lot of hostility from the Western side and a lot of the leaders, and he specifically mentioned Starmer and Macron. Well, you can listen to what people say and then come to your own conclusions. And between Macron and Sergei Lavrov, who is closer to what's actually happened? Because here is one of the things Emmanuel Macron did say. Okay, so Putin's just lying. You hear that all the time. You've mentioned that a few times. He's all evil. And when is he going to agree to a full ceasefire? he's never said that he's willing to do a ceasefire unless there are big conditions. He won't do an unconditional ceasefire.
No.
So why do you expect him to? And where is the lie in any of that?
Well, Putin, as Trump's clearly said many times when he was talking to Zelensky, you don't have any cards. If you work with us, you've got some cards, but you don't have any cards. Well, Macron's the same. Macron's got no cards. What cards has Macron got? But he's talking tough. Everybody else is a liar because he's still on that different page of narrative. He's not with the West. This is an unprovoked war, and we need to be doing the right thing by fighting off these aggressive bullies. And if you believe that, it's, as I said before, it's a fair position. You accept that's a fair thing. You've got an aggressive person starting a war for no reason. We've got to club together and stop it. It's a completely fair thing to say. And he's still, because most people believe that. So he's espousing that, and the people in Europe believe it, unfortunately.
Well, see, that one of our viewers there asked a question. I thought it was poignant because on the one hand, it would seem that Starmer and Macron are just, a bunch of blah, blah, blah. They're just talkers, but they're never going to actually act on it. But somebody said, yeah, but what if they did act on it? Do you think that it's, from what you've seen, do you think that they would ever actually send their troops into Ukraine?
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I believe that it's all talk. It's, they've cornered themselves. They've put themselves in this position where if you don't do this, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. Well, they've got to be seen to be at least trying to do that and doing it at a snail's pace, not just because they don't have any money and they don't have any weapons, but they're trying to buy time while these, whatever the negotiations, whatever you care to call them, are happening between Trump's people and the Russians. They're a sideshow. They're a sideshow. There's nothing going to happen. I was talking to one of my close friends who's in special forces. We've talked about him many times. He's off at the moment with his family, and he said that we have no chance against Russia. He said Russia hasn't even deployed its crack special forces in this operation. It's just insane. So, all the European stuff is a sideshow. Before they were calling the shots, now they're not. And that's the problem.
You talk about what Russia could do. You mentioned this before about this narrative that Russia either is fighting with shovels and they can't even defeat Ukraine, or they're going to be coming to get us. Now, it's laughable on the one hand, but then on the other hand, it's permeated at the highest levels. We're not just talking about somebody on X, or they said this, or some social media said that. We're talking about the Secretary General of NATO. So here he is just a couple of days ago at the White House, for crying out loud, after he had just met with Trump, says this about Putin and Russia.
I don't know. I worked with him for 4 years between 2010 and 2014 when I was Prime Minister of the Netherlands, and I stopped trying to read his mind. You mean President Putin? Huh? President Putin. You meant the Russian president? Yeah. Yes. So I worked with him for 4 years between 2010 and 2014. I stopped trying to read his mind. We'll see, but there is something on the table now, I think, where the Ukrainians are really playing ball. And I think the ball is clearly in the Russian court now. We all agree in NATO that Russia is the long-term threat to NATO territory, to the whole of the Euro-Atlantic territory.
So Russia's the long-term threat. You referred to that just a second ago. But what does he talk about when Ukraine is working hard for peace and the ball is in Russia's court? Russia has been unequivocal and clear from before the war started and at every point through the 3 years, especially now, reiterating what their conditions are and how is the ball in their court if they're waiting on the Ukraine side.
All I could say, it must be extremely frustrating for Trump and Vance and that team to talk to the Europeans. I think they've had enough of the Europeans, but no doubt about that whatsoever. And NATO, and NATO is American soft power. NATO, without the US, is not NATO. It doesn't exist. It's going to collapse. I think that possibly NATO might morph into a EU type army. and the Americans will still be there. I don't believe the Americans will ever leave. I think they'll still be there, but in a less strong capacity. And then the Europeans will just sort it out amongst themselves, which will just be a very expensive bureaucratic machine.
Yeah, Danny, I don't know if you remember, we had Patrick Bob, a German journalist, on this week, and that was exactly his assessment, because of the way that Trump is basically forcing NATO's hand to take on all of the economy of war, and what they would have to do not only to potentially fight the war, but then also to rebuild Ukraine. It's a price they can't possibly pay. And the way Patrick described it is that basically, they would not go bankrupt, but they literally just will not have the money to pull it off. And then therefore would just start to disintegrate, because any smart politician would get the heck out of Dodge when they see the burden that would be put upon them. And as Trump leaves and puts the financial burden on them, the weight of their incapacity to be able to take that on would basically just make them slowly crumble. He predicted like in 10 years, it would just dissolve.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that entirely.